Yeah, so I just wanted to show you this. Can you come in? Can you see that clearly? So just because it is Easter, an Easter theme, a friend gave me this yesterday, which I really loved. And this is a wild rose on an egg. And it's a lovely way of capturing the beauty of spring botanicals. So what she's done is she's just boiled up some onion skins and kind of licked a flat leaf and stuck it on the egg, and then stretched some tights over the egg, and then boiled the egg for like 10 minutes till it's hard boiled in the onion skin dye, and then you get this lovely imprint on the egg. I've never done it. I really want to do this with all sorts of botanicals now. I'm going to eat this later. Now, what I came up with today, and I thought it's a really good idea, but it's totally affected the functionality of the phone. And Mara, who's kindly helping me out today, is looking a bit baffled at the phone with all these bits of sellotape and nylon and fluff on the phone. And yeah, and it's something I use a lot. It's just like I was looking around this morning for something to use as a wind guard for the mic, and the only thing that came to mind was one of these things, because they're delightfully fluffy, and you know, it's almost like a microphone as it is, you know, so I was kind of thinking of that. So I basically I just disintegrated one of those, and I've stuck a whole load of fluff at the end of the phone. Is it working? I hope so. Now today we're going to talk mainly about, well, actually, I'm going to tell you a very short story. Are you sitting comfortably? Can you hear me? Is the wind trying to tell you a story, competing with my story? So, once upon a time, there was a plague and pestilence across the land, and people suffered greatly. They were used to going out and greeting each other with smiles and hugging, and just going about their daily lives, playing, having fun, shopping. But with the pestilence and the plague, all these things became impossible, and they couldn't go out anymore. And the great British public, who have a huge tradition of drinking tea, renowned the world over for their tea drinking, couldn't go out to get their daily tea, their daily beverage. It was very sad. So they had to be really resourceful, really resourceful. So they looked around. I know this story off by heart, it's amazing. So they looked around and they discovered that they didn't need to have tea that came all the way from India, and they didn't need to go to the shops to get it. But in fact, that tea was right close at hand. In fact, very often right in their back garden. So today, I'd like to talk about how we could make some of those teas. And particularly, well, when I think of teas, I expect loads of you think of like herbal teas. And actually I know there's when people talk about tea, they're really talking about, you know, the traditional tea plant. And when you talk about herbal teas, although we'd use that term kind of loosely, tea, I think we mean like botanical infusions that are tisanes or something like this. But I'm going to call them tea because I like to call it tea, okay? So when I'm thinking of teas, particularly in the spring, some things that really spring to mind, my favourite teas, often quite aromatic. So something that's coming out right now, is hawthorn, which is an aromatic blossom tea. I think of other flowers that you could use. You know, meadow sweets, like in small quantities. Gorse and dandelion, all kind of flower teas. But then there's leaves that we could use for tea. One of the best ones right now is nettle. Nettle tea. It just makes you feel great. Not that aromatic, but it's one of those teas that just after drinking it, you just feel infused with the kind of strengthening qualities of nettle leaf, spring nettle leaf. Other leaf teas, like wild mint teas, my favourite tea, lemon balm tea, which you occasionally see growing wild, we could all use. But today I'm thinking about teas that really mimic, in terms of flavour, the traditional British cup of tea. That's what we're after. And those plants tend to be quite tannic, so quite drying. So when you think of tannins, like think of drinking wine, and that first kind of red wine and that kind of first sip is kind of quite astringent. So that's like tannins from like the oak barrels. Or think of eating fruit. There's kind of some various fruits, like an underripe apple. It's like quite tannic. It's like, and you know, the reason for that is that tannins function. There's lots of different tannins in plants, and many function to prevent predation, prevent animals eating the seed, for example, or the fruit until the seed is ripe. So, you know, that high level of tannin stops us doing that. But tannin actually can really add to the flavours of our drinks. So I don't know if you can see this, but if you can look up against the sky, can you capture that? So we have one of the first leaves that I'm going to pick today, which is oak. Now, oak can be worked with in many ways. How's the wind noise, by the way? Is this working? Am I coming right up close and being really creepy? Is it working? Yeah. So when I think of the oak tree as a wild food, I predominantly think of acorns. And if we're in kind of lockdown, come October, I'll be talking a lot about acorns. We can do all sorts of fun things. But right now, it's the leaves of the oak. And aren't they just gorgeous? I think so many leaves at this time of year, when they're just bursting out. I mean, some leaves actually look like little baby hands just kind of greeting the spring. But at this time of year, there's just such a kind of vitality and force to them, but also a kind of beautiful newness that I love in new leaves that doesn't last very long. And it's a time for enjoying those kind of more kind of yellowy greens before the transition comes and they go into like the darker greens of late spring and summer. So today I'm going to be gathering oak leaves. Wow, it's so windy. It's so windy out here. So what I like to do, you see that clearly? Gather a few sprigs. Now, I actually gathered quite a lot earlier, so to make tea, I'm going to need a little bit more than that, but we go through the whole process. And when I'm talking about tea in regard to tannin-rich plants that can mimic English tea or breakfast tea, I'm not talking about just getting the leaves and drying them or using fresh and sticking in a mug of water. It's a little more complex than that to develop the flavours, and that's the process I'm going to take you through today. just before we do, I meant to show you this right at the beginning, but have a look at this. I found these yesterday. I've been searching for these for a year, and then I found them in my cupboard, and I was very happy because these come from an oak tree. Have a look at these. So these are marble galls, so you could actually play marbles with them. But and I thought I'd mention those just because it kind of illustrates tannins. Is that these are used for making ink. Can you get in and hear the lovely noise of this, Mara? Oh look, there's a joker in the pack. Did you spot the joker? Look at that. Also, now I have a bag to put my tea in, which I didn't before. So, yeah, the reason I mentioned those, because when you are going out looking for oaks to pick leaves from, sometimes it's hard to reach these bigger oaks. You might have ones with like lower branches, but quite often it's easier to get leaves from young oaks. Now, young oaks, and you know, I've seen different reports. It could be sessile oak or pedunculate oak. But certainly like our two native oaks, I think in particular, when they're young, and when they're young, I'm thinking kind of like, you know, not more than like 10, 15 foot high. Like sometimes they can be absolutely covered in these galls. So all these ones came from one very small tree, one very small oak tree last year when I was getting these young leaves. So it's interesting as well because these are like the kind of incubation chambers, if you like, of a gall wasp that lays its eggs. I think in the leaf bud. It could be the acorn bud, but I think the leaf bud. And it changes the genetics and creates this incubation chamber out of the oak like tissue. But also in doing that, what it does, it really concentrates the tannins. And those tannins act as a protection so that nothing's going to eat that gall or attack the grubs inside. Huh?
It's a question.
Question. Good question.
Are the knobbly oak falls as rich in tannin?
Okay, I will just say, are the knobbly oak galls rich in tannins? Now I wonder which ones you mean by those, and I'm so glad you asked because it gets me to be able to do this. That's my impression of a knopper gall, which I think you might mean by the knobbly ones. Like the knopper galls, they actually form on the acorn, and you see them in the tree or on acorns that have fallen. And if you've seen the Alien films, and the kind of the baby alien comes out and goes that in your face, think of that as a knopper gall, like doing that on the acorn. Yes, you can, and it just so happens that a friend of mine sent me this through the post, which is knopper gall ink, made out of the knobbly ones. But the reason I thought I'd mention this is because the book I started reading from at the beginning, that was written in oak gall ink. It's a book I co-authored, and it's about how to use natural materials that you've gathered to wildcraft a book and make the ink yourself, make the paint yourself, make the paper yourself as out of mushrooms as it has been. But so that if you do want to do this and you see these galls while you're out collecting your oak leaves to make your English breakfast tea, it's pretty basic. You can look up a simple recipe for making oak gall ink, but I'll just say very briefly. You get these oak galls, you crush them up, you either just infuse them for a day or so, or you can boil them. Then you, in a couple handful of those, a couple of pints of water, boil them up. I like to leave them simmering for a few hours and then just leave them in the hot water. Then a couple of things you can do. You can add some rusty nails, a couple of rusty nails, because you need some iron. Or if you want to just use your own iron that you've found, you can use some iron pyrite. It's the stuff that I found on the beach. So smash that open, stick that in your pan, that'll give you your iron you need. Then you can add some tree resin, so some dry cherry resin or something. Dissolve a bit of that in there, it helps it kind of bind a bit better. And finally, that ink, it wasn't just that, but just to add a little bit more blackness, we added the spores of King Alfred's cake, another mushroom. So you can craft ink entirely from wild things. But let's go and make some tea, because that's the main purpose of today. I wonder if you can guess what other plants I'm going to use to make tea. Now there are quite a few obscure things, but I thought what I'd focus on are things which are really common. So we've got oak leaves, and there's another plant here, but it's a little better over there in the hedge, where it's kind of, it's easier to pick, and it's out of the wind. How's the fluffy thing? The fluffy thing keeps coming off. How is it? Yeah, sellotape and fluffy things on the phone. So I mean, look at this big oak. Blowing up. So while we're looking in that hedgerow here, can you keep putting that back to kind of keep the fluff on it? Is bramble, or yeah, what the plant that produces the obvious and well-known wild food, probably the one that nearly all of you in the UK that have any interest in wild foods have eaten, which is blackberry. But this is the bramble, and there are many uses of bramble, and I'm going to, as I make this tea, take you through the process later. I'm going to discuss and show you some examples that you could do with plants, with bramble plants at different times of the year. I'm stumbling because I've just realised I think I left it in what I'm talking about in the chaos of my bedroom upstairs, and actually they're not there at all, but it doesn't matter. I might run and get them. But right now we're looking at this new growth, and actually that's okay. It's a little bit long and straggly, that one, and the thorns are starting to develop a little bit there. So what I really want is ones that I can pick easily without any gloves and no kind of like thorns. Then they're going to be like the perfect ones. Let's have a look. Let's have a look at these ones. Yeah, look, this is. Yeah, have a look at this one. Yeah, look at this one. So this is absolutely perfect. So what I pick is just there, there, there. It's okay to get some bigger leaves, but I kind of just like the really young ones. There we are. Oh look. Yeah, so I find that if you are picking young bramble shoots for tea, that you might find hedgerows with brambles that are really in full direct sun, and the leaf shoots that are coming out, they tend to be tougher, not so like lovely and kind of soft, and yeah, they get kind of more kind of red kind of browns in them quite early, and yeah, just a kind of tougher leaf. You could make tea out of that, but I enjoy finding like the best kind of quality ones, and which I find are the ones growing in the shade, so I'd recommend that. By the way, I went and got loads of these yesterday, loads of oak leaves and loads of bramble leaves, so that this just wasn't an hour of me picking bramble leaves, which actually I think would have been really quite interesting, to tell you the truth. Very calming, very relaxing, just gently picking bramble leaves. So it's going to be oak leaf tea, bramble leaf tea, and another tea which some of you might know, because before the introduction of tea to Russia, this was a very popular plant to use for tea. Now, I expect in some places there's still a tradition of using it, but I don't know. I've never been to Russia. And I'm trying to remember the name that they call this tea. But all will be revealed in a second, because it's growing just by the house. And it's a plant that just happens to be growing because, although we've got some beautiful kind of plants here, actually if you look down here, yeah, we're not over concerned about weeding. You know, it's so wonderful to be in a place where there isn't an over concern about weeding, because, you know, as we know, weeds, there's no such thing. It's really just a plant in the wrong place or something. But so when you are walking past a hedgerow, it's really important to be very attentive, because, you know, you see what's there. So oh, look, Hedgerow Medicine, one of my favourite books, in the hedgerow. Actually, this is a pendulous sedge, by the way, which, come have a look down here, Mara. This isn't the plant that we're going to use for tea. I just thought I'd show you a sedge, because the other plant is just around the corner. So sedges, you can tell they're sedges because if you cut them in a cross section, they're triangular. In fact, I don't know if you can see that. Can you see that triangle? Kind of three sides, really, more than a triangle. And that very bottom bit, particularly inside, you've just got a little edible portion, just a little snack. But the main interest about pendulous sedge is, can you see that, Mara? We've got the young, a kind of catkin essentially, coming out, and when that goes to seed later in the year, we can strip the seeds off and use those. But anyway.
Live video pause. Oh, no, it's good.
Has it started?
Yeah.
Have a look here. The Hedgerow Medicine by Julie Brunton Seal and Matthew Seal. Excellent book, by the way. So we're looking at this plant, which you might recognise, Rosebay willowherb. It's this one here, and that's the seed pods with the kind of the fluffy bits, a bit like the kind of on dandelion, really. And come and have a look at here. I thought I'd show you it in flower, because now these are the old plants. You can see there's some of the remains of the fluff, but it's starting to grow. We've got the spring growth coming. So Rosebay willowherb is, oh, Where is it? Yes, I know. I couldn't remember the words. So they say in Russia the leaves are drunk as a tea called kapori, and it's very interesting actually because we're working with this from a food point of view, really, to make a nice tea, not really herbally. But what's really lovely about this, it says what Rosebay willow leaf tea is used for herbally, and it's for digestion, diarrhea, IBS, heavy periods, mouth ulcers, sore throats, prostate problems. Now, a lot of tannin-rich plants are used for sore throats, quite generally. But look, we're just going to pick some of these. Can you see them? There's some I picked earlier, and actually it's kind of quite interesting because this one here, that was growing in like full sun, like about 100 meters away, whereas this one is a very shady part of the house, just in front of the, you can just see here, just in front of the house. So it's very shady. This wind's going to go right in there. This fluff thing on my phone is causing chaos. Are you back? Are you back? Anyone back?
Can you show the book again, please? Someone asked.
Yeah. So when I make these videos, what I'm doing now, and I've managed to do it, is put them all on YouTube. And when I do that, I put links to everything. But the book is Hedgerow Medicine, and there's another one called Wayside Medicine, I think that's the name of it, by Julie Brunton Seal and Matthew Seal. It's a brilliant book. I think if you zoom on it, it just shows it backwards. If you're good at reading backwards, there you go. Lovely book. So let's go and make the tea.
Oh, there we go.
Oh,
Good.
there we go.
Good.
So what's the contrast like? Is it okay?
You're quite dark.
Okay, let's go around the other way. It's probably better. How's that? Let's have a look at these. Isn't that lovely? So these are some oak leaves I gathered yesterday. And actually, when you're working with, what did I do with the big bunch? These.
In your bag?
Oh, I don't know. No, I think maybe I put them. Anyway, got those. So, like if you're working with something like Rosebay willowherb, like we could just hang them up in a kind of warm room and let them dry if we wanted to keep them dry. And store for later use if we weren't using them fresh. You wouldn't be able to do that so much with oak leaves because obviously
Connecting.
But what we could do if we wanted to dry these is just spread them out on newspaper and leave in a warm place for a while. But what I'm going to do, and so what happened about 10 years ago, I was thinking about tea. And I'm going to just come in a bit, just in case there's some wind coming in. Just so you can come nearer. So, Yes, about 10 years ago, I was thinking about herbal teas, and particularly things like wild raspberry leaf tea, yeah, kind of nettle tea. Actually, no, not nettle tea. Well, I think it was like raspberry leaf tea I was thinking about. And I was thinking about when I've tried this and I didn't really like it very much. And I thought, well, the reason is this tea leaves, this plant has been gathered for tea, and the most traditional thing is we just air dry it or use fresh, and then you've got your tea. But I was thinking, well, why is it that apart from like traditional tea, the tea plant, which is taken through a process of oxidizing the leaves to develop the flavour, get it really dark. Of course, it's not the only way of working with that traditional tea is produced, but a lot of it is taken through this process of oxidization. And I was thinking, well, could that be done with any herbal tea? And I thought, well, it is done. It's done with redbush tea or rhubarb tea. So that's also taken through a similar process. Leaves that you could use. And my first thought was oak leaves. And the reason being, when I first got into wild food, like years ago, back in like about 1990, I used to make a lot of wines. And one of the first wines I made was oak leaf wine. Now you can look, there's many recipes for oak leaf wine. So that was interesting for me, because like, okay, there's some tradition of using oak leaves in food. A slightly silly story around that is that I worked on the principle at that time that if some is good, like loads is even better. And I made this oak leaf wine, which was like a gallon with literally a bucket's worth of oak leaves, and it fermented out, but you know, it was terrible. It was like, it was so dry and tannic. But anyway, the point was, was an existing tradition of using oak leaves. So what I like to do is do a kind of home style way of taking leaves, and we do this with all three here, although I might only demonstrate one, is take them through a process of oxidizing. Now, this is different from fermenting. So what we're talking about here is breaking open, like, well, bruising, essentially, bruising the leaves. And you could use various things. Got a steak hammer here. Before I had a steak hammer, I just used to use a rolling pin. So let's just do what I used to do. And it's a little bit noisy, but it's kind of like this. Background to the rhythm of my beating, which is really nice, but it's not going to happen today. So. With these tender oak leaves, it doesn't take very long at all. But now see, you can do it with this as well. The little girl I lived with was crushing garlic yesterday, and I was just about to use this without checking it was washed, and I almost garlicked all my bramble leaves, but no. Just a little bit more and then we're done. So I'm going to switch to the rolling pin again.
question.
Yeah.
What is your YouTube profile, please?
My YouTube profile, I think my YouTube is just called Fergus Drennan. So there we are. Look at that. I could bash it a little bit more, and you might be thinking, well, could I stick that in a food processor, maybe with one of like the plastic blades on it, so it doesn't get all chopped up? I reckon you could. I've never done that. Do you know, when I first did this about 10 years ago, this is the method. I kind of stick with it. So the next thing, is there a question?
No, we just cut out for a sec.
So the next thing I do is get a tea towel. Wet it. Rinse it out. Spread it out a little bit. Then I use a towel as well. I mean, it's not strictly necessary, it's just to make sure that that doesn't dry out. You want to keep it nice and damp. I think you can get more water in a towel. So then, ideally, you want to keep that quite warm for about 3 days. Now, when I first did this, this is the method I use, and to be honest, this is the method I still use most of the time. But occasionally, I mean, it was so lovely, wasn't it? The last few days, glorious sunshine, what, 20, 22, 3, 4 degrees even. That's perfect conditions. And really, if you're going to use this method that doesn't require dehydrators, doesn't need an airing cupboard, you want to check the weather and make sure you've got 2-3 days of around 20, 25 degrees. Perfect. But when I first decided to do this, it was like that, with these like days of warmth. So I did exactly this, and I got it, and I threw it out on the grass, and I got a bin lid, and that's it, done. And then, well, not done, the process beginning. So there we are. So if you think about the way, or if you look at the way that traditional tea is made, is that the tea is taken through this oxidization process, and it changes the tannins in a way that develops the flavor profile of the tea. So that's kind of what we're doing there. Now, have a look here. Actually, this isn't just so. This isn't strictly true. Just quickly look here. So. Just to make what I was about to say true, which is here's what I prepared earlier. Well, what I prepared earlier was bramble stems. So I'm just going to give this a quick bash. So these are the bramble stems I picked yesterday. By the way, if you're using a rolling pin, make sure you've got a gap. Otherwise, you over here. Otherwise, you end up mashing your fingers. Don't do that. So bramble leaves, they're not as tender as the oak leaves, so they take a little bit more bashing. To do this really well, it's going to take about 5 minutes of bashing and pounding. But I won't do that just now, but I will show you the ones I did yesterday. So these have only been going for a day, but have a look. Ideally 3 days. And what I'm hoping for, and because I did this yesterday afternoon, I expect it's not there yet, but that that they will start to go darker. After 3 days, they'll be considerably darker. Now, there we are. That's pretty good, actually. That is pretty good. So yeah, if you just got your bramble leaves or your oak leaves and you dried them, they'd be pretty much like this, but dried. If you take them through this process of oxidizing them, that smells wonderful. Now, it's very interesting because although there's lots of science behind this, in a sense, it's not an exact science, to use that term in another way. Because although typically I leave this for like 3 days, you've got to go on your own judgment. So I'm looking at this right now and thinking, that's it. It's been less than a day and it's at the stage when I want it. This is perfect. Now, if I left that any longer, it's going to go from oxidization to fermentation. I don't want those fermenty flavors. I just want these just rich, developed tannin flavors. So that's the bramble. And just before we taste, well, you experience the taste with me, with your imagination. I'll just say about the other plant. So the Rosebay willowherb, what I would do with this one is I would strip the leaves off the stem, get rid of the stem, and just use the leaves. But then I would bash that in the same way. It's more tender, a bit like the oak. And
Sarah says, now I know where all our tea towels have gone.
Yes, it's a bit controversial if I have to. And honestly, it's not true. I just have to say this in public, it's not true. Because, like yesterday, like so many of our tea towels have disappeared, right? But they've reappeared, haven't they, Mara? Say it wasn't me. Like, yeah, I do use some tea towels for some unconventional things. So,
there's a question.
Yeah.
Is there a significant difference from tannin rich to fermentation?
Is there a difference tannin rich to fermentation? I don't quite understand that question, to be honest. What we're working here is we're developing the flavour in the tannins through the process of oxidization from some of the other chemicals in the leaves. And that works very well with tannin rich leaves that have a tradition of use. But thank you for that question anyway, because what it's reminded me is that I forgot to tell you a crucial part. So we don't want it to move into fermentation. We want to stop it when it's perfectly oxidized. So in order to do that, we need to dry it. So if it's really sunny, you can spread it out really thin and dry it, or you could do it in a food dehydrator or some other way like that. And then come and have a look at this. So this is the finished product. This one is actually oak leaf tea that's been oxidized for 3 days. And I'm going to make some. So I guess if you're using normal tea, you'd use about that much. Because it's oak leaf, I tend to use 2. And some boiling water.
Do you oxidize your nettle leaves in this way too?
No, I really don't oxidize my nettle leaves in this way because I don't like the flavour that's produced. And the reason I don't do that is because they're not as tannin rich as oak leaves or bramble. So I only do this with really tannic rich plants. And I think also if you do it with non-tannic rich things, it moves into fermentation much quicker. So yeah, there's one of my favourite wild teas is one called sea buckthorn. Now it's not using the berry, it's using the tea and the leaves for tea. Now that produces a lovely kind of vibrant kind of yellow, golden yellowy tea. But if you oxidize that, it darkens, but the flavour isn't as good. So it's worth trying. You know, like if you want to see what nettle leaf tea is like if you oxidize it, give it a go. That's always my recommendation. Is you can kind of learn from kind of people like me, get inspired hopefully with kind of techniques that I might be demonstrating. But always, I think I'd encourage you to experiment yourself, because what I think is delicious, you might think, well, or not delicious, you might think the opposite. So finally, just before we drink that tea, I want to...
There's one more question.
One more question.
The clarification. How do you know when the leaves have gone past oxidization and into fermentation?
Yes. So what I should have called this whole video is the art of tea making. Maybe the art and science of tea making, because as I said, it's not an exact thing. It's more, so what I'm going on here, when I was looking at these bramble leaves, I'm looking at the colour, and as much as anything, I'm going on the smell. So the smell of this, it's kind of fruity. It's got a clean smell. It's just very different to the smell when oxidation starts to happen. So yeah, maybe you have to let it oxidize to know what that smell is. Yeah, you could leave a little batch for longer, so you know what that starting to ferment smell is compared to one that isn't fermenting. So just before we drink this tea, I want to tell you about a couple of books that I find really inspiring, and they're both very related to what we're doing here. So the first one, and I'll just mention it briefly because, you know, the one reason I kind of love wild food is because as a child I was just inspired by the natural world, and it's kind of led me to kind of do what I do. And yeah, one could kind of pontificate about all the benefits of wild food and be really worthy and all the rest of it. But, you know, the bottom line is, as a kid, get out there and just enjoy the natural world. Or, you know, if you're an adult and you've got kids, like, take them out. But then, like, what do you do? Like, yeah, we're out in the wild, like, what do you do? Yeah, you can just walk and kind of look at things. But sometimes you need a bit of inspiration. And this wonderful, wonderful book, which I was looking at last night, it's called The Children's Forest. And it's by Dawn Casey, Anna Richardson and Helen Ascoli. And it's so beautiful. I think I'm going to cry. It's so beautiful and heartwarming that, you know, it's one of the books I wished I had or my parents had used when I was a kid. And yeah, it says The Children's Forest is a rich treasury of seasonal stories and songs, natural crafts and outdoor games, animal, tree and plant lore, wild food recipes, meditations and ceremonies, and just look, isn't that gorgeous?
Ooh.
Songs, and guess what? I'm not going to do it because I don't want to embarrass myself. But the lovely thing in here is all the songs, and yeah. There's a song of the bramble, and even better than that, there's a dance that you can do around the bramble. So really, I should be singing the song of the bramble and doing the dance of the bramble before drinking bramble tea, or doing the dance of the oak before drinking oak tea. But talking about drinking, we're going to come to an end in a couple of minutes. But drinking a wild tea for the first time is to really slow down that experience and make it something really deep and sensual and meditative. And where I'm going with that is to a wonderful herbalist called Nathaniel Hughes. And he's written this again. Look at this beautiful book. Beautiful book.
What's it called?
It's called Weeds in the Heart. So Nathaniel has a website, and it is oh my goodness, what is it? Is it intuitive herb? I'm going to put the intuitive herbalism. I'm not sure, but I'm going to put a link to his website. And on his website, there's resources. If you go into resources, you'll see a tea drinking ceremony meditation, and it's so lovely. And it's a recorded thing. It takes 15 minutes, and it's really engages your senses first. So it's like smelling a tea, just gently just going with that smell, being quiet with that smell, that aroma. And then when you've kind of fully done that, then it's tasting the tea, and then just really like sipping it, taking sips, and then finally just in your mind, in your heart, just thinking about what's impressions that are coming for the first time experiencing drinking this wild plant, ingesting it. It's just a lovely guided meditation. So I'd really encourage you to do that. I think it's a school of intuitive herbalism, resources. But let's have a look at this tea. So oak leaf tea, and we could put more in. I'd make it darker. It can be as dark as regular tea, but I'm going to say cheers. And just before I leave, are there any questions? So maybe one question if there's a question. Cheers everybody, and happy Easter.
Can I try?
Can you try? Yeah.
With milk?
Yeah, you could do it with milk. Absolutely.
Can we end with the Bramble dance?
Yeah. Well, I would like to read from that book actually, but it's copyright things. But anyway, I'd encourage you to do this. And what is the Bramble dance? So the Bramble, the Bramble dance, and actually later on in the season, I'm going to talk about some other things you can do with Bramble. What I'm particularly going to be talking about is when you're walking along and it's kind of May time, and you get these really big, kind of rapidly growing branches or shoots of the Bramble, and they kind of grab you. But based on that, this is how this dance kind of goes. That is the Bramble dance. And with that, I bid you farewell. Let's see if I can save it.